So now let's look at the concept of math and the existence of God. Math and the existence of God. First of all, I want you to see that math hints at the infinite. When we look into mathematics, we see some things that sort of make us scratch our head and say, why is this here? Why is this way? For example, numbers can go on forever. We can count forever. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and go on, millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions, and so on. When I was in the 7th grade, we had to memorize those types of numbers all the way out to 10 or 12 places, billions, millions, trillions, quadrillions, and so on. I don't remember much of that anymore, but you can go on forever. Interesting, isn't it? You can go on forever. There's no stopping. Infinity, this concept here, you've seen this symbol. According to Britannica.com, infinity is the concept of something that is unlimited, endless, without bound. The common symbol for infinity, the little like 8 on its side, was invented by the English mathematician John Wallis in 1655. So infinity is built into numbers, and it hints at something, that there is some part of existence that goes on and on and on forever. And there's another one. We're going to talk about this one in a moment as well, but the measurement of pi, this Greek symbol here on the right. Pi is when you take a circle and you put a dot right in the middle. All right, the diameter is how you go all the way across the circle, but half of that diameter is called the radius. Well, what we figured out is if you take that radius and divide it into the total length of that circle, you get a number every single time. And that number is 3.14159.265 and so on. And what's interesting is that number never repeats and it never ends. So if you just take a circle and you take the radius and you divide it into that the circumference, you get a number that never ends. According to scientificamerican.com, with computational advances, thanks to computers, we now know more than the first 6 billion digits of pi. The first 6 billion. But we've gone 6 billion digits out past that decimal point, and we still have not found it repeating, and we have not found an end to it. Numbers hint at infinity. Math hints at infinity. So let's talk about God's existence. How can we deduce God's existence from mathematics? Here's the key. Mathematical formulas, which are abstracts, apply to physical objects. Mathematical formulas, they're abstract. You can't touch them. They're immaterial. You can't measure them in any way. They apply to things that are physical. So we have this connection between the physical and the abstract or immaterial. Let's look at a couple of examples. For example, pi applies to every circle. Every physical circle there is, whether it's in nature or if it's made by man. For example, I was just looking here on my desk and I've got an iPhone. All right, and there's a circle. You probably can't see it, but there's a circle button on the bottom of that iPhone. Well, if you take the radius of that circle and you divide it into the total circumference, you're going to get 3.14 and so on. All right? Now over here, I've got a speaker. Let's see if I can get this without breaking my wires. We have a speaker. See that speaker? That speaker has a circle on it. Well, guess what? That speaker, just like the circle on this phone, will show the exact same number. If I take a bubble from a child's little toy where you dip the little round thing in the bubble water and you blow it, you get a bubble. You get a circle. Very, very close to an absolute perfect circle. Guess what? Pi applies to that. So we've got this mathematical abstract idea, concept, but it applies to every single circle that exists ever, anywhere. Very interesting, isn't it? Also, the area of the circle. So if you take that circle and you say, how much is in there? How much space is in there? If I take pi, 3.14 and so on, and take the radius and square it and multiply those two together, I will get the area of every circle that ever exists anywhere in the world, physical, natural, or man-made. Every single time. Every single time. And then we have something called the Pythagorean theorem. And I used this when I was doing construction. And that is applies to right triangles. And basically what happens here, if you look at this graphic, there is a relationship between the A side of this triangle, see the right triangle, the 90 degrees in the bottom left between A and B, that's the right angle. If you take A and B, there's a relationship between the length of A, the length of B, and the length of C. So you can use this theorem to figure out if you've got a square in your corner, if you're building, say, a base for a deck. And I would use that. I would measure, and then I would measure C. I would get C right, and then I knew that when I had the C at the end of A and the end of B, that I would have a perfect right angle in that corner. Well, guess what? That theorem, A squared plus B squared equals C squared, applies to every right triangle in existence. So if I were to take this right here, this is a little device we use. See if you can see this. I'll put it over so you can see it a little better. This is a little device that we plug into the computer so we can read little memory cards from cameras. Again, I'm not sure you can see that. But let's look at this little box. If I took this box and I cut it in half, down like this, and I wanted to know how far is it from that corner to that corner, all I would need to do is measure this side A, the bottom side B, and then put it into that formula. Every single square I could do divided into two right triangles or rectangles, and I could know what the measurements are. We've got an abstract concept, doesn't exist in any physical way, but it applies to every physical thing there is. That is very interesting, if you ask me. In the beginning, in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, numbers are introduced. Ideas of mathematics are introduced by God. In Genesis 1, God identifies what we call ordinal numbers. Numbers defining order, first, second, third. Remember he says on the first day, on the second day, on the third day. These are called ordinal numbers. And in doing so, God introduces natural numbers, 1, 2, 3. God also identifies pairs and sets. 2 animals, 2 humans, 6 days. But here's the thing to remember, and this is it. You might say, well, that's obvious. I mean, obviously he's just counting. But here's the thing you've got to remember. This is the very first activity in the whole of time. There has been no counting thus far. There are no people. There's no math that's been discovered by human beings. By the way, we discover math. We don't create it. None of that. God is creating the physical world, and then he is speaking these fundamental abstract concepts over that world right at the very beginning. So mathematics, these abstract concepts, were grouped together and tied to the physical world in Genesis 1 and 2. Creation.com had this to say about numbers in Genesis. A fundamental mathematical concept in Genesis 1 is the inclusion of entities in sets. 6 days of creative activity and 2 great lights. Talking about the sun and the moon. Sets are based on the abstract concept that assumes the existence of universals and not merely particulars. What this means, I put this in the quote here, it means that it assumes the abstract concept that we can classify things, that there aren't just individual things, a tree, a man, a rock, but there are classes of things. There are humans, there are trees, there are rocks. You see what I mean? Not just individuals, but groups and classes, by which each entity is viewed as independent from all others. The correspondence, and this is the point that I'm making here, the correspondence, that is the relationship between the abstract, immaterial idea, math concepts, such as ordinal counting and sets, and phenomenon in nature is difficult for naturalists to explain. What he's saying here is, how is it that in the Big Bang, if all there was matter and energy, physical things, how is it that we can have these abstract ideas that are just as real applied to that physical? Where did the abstract come from if everything was only physical in the beginning? If mathematics is purely an invention of human minds, then it is a challenge to explain the correspondence between a mathematical equation and what happens in the natural realm. You see, how do you explain that every circle, a pi applies to it? Every area of a circle is pi r squared. The length of the long side of a right triangle is always a squared plus b squared equals c squared. How do you explain that in the natural realm if everything is just physical. How do we explain abstract math concepts then? Mathematics is impressed upon creation because it is an outflow of the Creator's mind. You cannot separate the physical from the abstract because the immaterial abstract comes from the mind of the Creator who made the physical. They cannot be separated because God is overarching the creation. Math, therefore, is clear evidence of God's existence.